I've seen church planners leave a church and go 5 miles down the road, and man, I feel like God is no. It's well watered. Yeah, it feels like it's going to work, and I've seen a lot of them.
I probably did the same thing. I want this. I want that.
Well, and you think you want it now. Abraham was willing to play the long game. He had an encounter with God that was so very real that it caused him to.
Hey everybody, before we jump into today's episode, we'd like to recognize all those who make this podcast possible. The Lead Today show is supported by all the generous donors of the Lead Today community. Thank you so much for investing in shaping leaders through this podcast. And be sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform you are watching or listening today. All right, let's jump into the podcast.
Hey everybody, you have found the Today Count Show. Glad that you have joined us. The Today Count Show, we called it that because we believe that every day counts, that God has given us a day, and that day should be embraced. And it also is planted into our tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. We're talking about life and leadership. In this particular episode, we are walking through the biblical book of Genesis, and we find ourselves, I believe it's in chapter 13 right now, and you will find all kinds of leadership lessons and life lessons that come through this. But first, let me say hi to everybody. Matt, Gary, Winston, how are you guys? Glad you joined me today.
Hello. Yeah.
Doing great. Warming up in Ohio.
Yeah, we got one in Ohio, two looks like in San Antonio, Texas, and the other in Spring Branch, Texas. So here we are. So we're picking up in Genesis 13, and I'm glad the four of us are back together again. I think it's been a while since all four of us have been here. I'm looking at Genesis 13, verse 1, reading out of the NLT, which stands for New Living Translation. It says, so Abram left Egypt and traveled north into Negev along with his wife and Lot and all they owned. Lot is a name, his wife and Lot. Abram was very rich in livestock, silver, and gold. From the Negev, they continued traveling by stages toward Bethel, and they pitched their tents near Bethel and Ai, some pronounce it that way, where they had camped before. This was the same place where Abram had built the altar, and there he worshiped the Lord again. On verse 5, it says, Lot, who was traveling with Abram, had also become very wealthy with flocks of sheep and goats, herds of cattle, and many tents. But the land could not support both Abram and Lot with all their flocks and herds living so close together. So disputes broke out between the herdsmen of Abram and of Lot. At that time, Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land. Sounds like diseases, does it? Parasites, Perizzites, sounds like parasites. Finally, Abram said to Lot, let's not allow this conflict to come between us or our herdsmen. After all, we are close relatives. The whole countryside is open to you. Take your choice of any section of the land you want, and we will separate. If you want the land to the left, then I'll take the land on the right. If you prefer the land on the right, and then I'll go to the left. I think I'm going to read the whole chapter because there's a lot of good stuff to talk about. Verse 10 says, Lot took a long look at the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley in the direction of Zoar. The whole area was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord or the beautiful land of Egypt. There's a note here that says this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot chose for himself the whole Jordan Valley to the east of them. He went there with his flocks and servants and parted company with his uncle, Abram. So Abram settled in the land of Canaan, and Lot moved his tents to a place near Sodom and settled among the cities of the plain. But the people of this area were extremely wicked and constantly sinned against the Lord. After Lot had gone, the Lord said to Abram, look, as far as you can see in every direction, north and south, east and west, I am giving all this land as far as you can see to you and your descendants as a permanent possession. And I will give you so many descendants that, like the dust of the earth, they cannot be counted. Go and walk through the land in every direction, for I am giving it to you. So Abram moved his camp to Hebron and settled near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. There he built another altar to the Lord. And folks, this comes right after chapter 12 tells us that a famine in Canaan kind of chased Abram and Lot and all their associates into Egypt. You might remember, whether you're with us or not, that didn't turn out to be a very good thing, but yet they still came back with a lot of riches. All right, guys. So let's get started. I'm going to start by throwing this out to you. Did Abram really need to leave in the first place? Yes, I know that the Bible says that there was a famine. In fact, the NLT kind of says there's a famine, so he had to go. But I'm still thinking that was his thinking that he had to go. I'm not certain that he had to leave. I know there was a famine, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
I guess I haven't been here in a minute, so you're gonna just wait and see if I talk. So, um,
We've been missing your voice.
oh yeah, I appreciate that. When we started this, you told me it was just like we were sitting around having coffee around the table, and I've missed a few coffee chats here.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to be back. It's interesting. Did he have to leave Egypt? I'm with you. I think that point could be up to debate and conversation. I think there may be something too. I know we'll get there. We jump to the end of the chapter though. Could it be that some significance? God wanted him standing in a certain place when he promised everything to him, and maybe not being in Egypt. Um, I think there's could he appreciate what we all know the parallel of Egypt and throughout Scripture, but could God, allow him to experience what happened in Egypt and that come along with him, so that when he stood in the place where God would promise him, he would be ready to receive? Is one thing that comes to mind for me there. Um, the short answer to did he have to leave Egypt? I think I think we make a lot of decisions when we get hungry. Desperate people do unique things. Um, and could there be a sense of desperation that had taken over a little bit? Because even when you find they got to the good land, and I have some comments as you were reading through it, I was making notes, things were coming to me. I mean, the herdsmen couldn't get along on good land. Imagine how difficult it was on famine land to try to get along. So he may have just been, we got to get out of here before, yeah, the famine's here, but we're going to kill each other before the famine kills us. So
Was that your question, Jim? Whether they really needed to split apart?
No, my question was, uh, the latter part of this chapter, God is repeating himself to Abram. It's the exact same promise that he gave him before. Almost like the way I kind of took it is almost like, all right, let's try this again.
yeah,
And then they split. Now I don't know; it's conjecture. And they did come back with more than what they went with, which is interesting to me as well. What I love about the story of Abram, you guys, is that he clearly was a leader. He was clearly a man of faith. But you get this feeling, at least I get this feeling, that when he got back from Egypt, he was a different Abram than he was when he went into Egypt. And even when we make bad decisions, let's just say it was a bad decision, or let's just say it wasn't a bad decision, and God wanted to take him through, a famine, right? In either case, it was a difficult time, and we don't like difficult times, but as I read through this, it sure seems like a different Abram, which we'll talk about in a minute. It seems more mature. Matt said with some humor, we all do desperate things when we're hungry. So he went, but he might have been thinking like a leader too. I got to save my family from famine, and if God was silent, which often he is when we go through difficult times. At least that's been my experience. I often, when I need to hear him or want to hear him the most, he can seem silent. So I do what I can. He goes. And then, as we recall in chapter 12, he gets his wife in trouble. He gets himself in trouble. He gets the king in trouble. He uses a foreign king to chastise him and, shoot him. Well, yet he comes back with more riches than he went with. I think about the difficulties being a follower. We have these terms in our culture that says that, sometimes we don't conquer, we don't win because we let the closed door, stop us, and we need to have the faith to knock the door down. And then on the other hand, we have talk in our culture that God opens doors, God, closes doors. And it's sometimes hard to know, isn't it? Am I quitting? Am I giving up? Or did God close a door that he didn't mean for me to walk through? I mean, do you guys get clarity on that?
I'm in the middle of one of those right now, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
I mean,
Are we allowed to ask questions too, or is it only you, Jim?
I thought we're having coffee.
Oh, well, I got a question. What is the significance of this phrase? And there, Abram called on the name of the Lord. It's a phrase that's used frequently in the Old Testament, and does it convey an act of worship that's different than sort of day-to-day interaction with God? In this case, it's mentioned in context of the altar, I think. So
Yeah, I would love to take a stab at that from my own experience. I find that I talk about God a lot, and I talk about God with people who are not necessarily people of faith, and I talk about God with people of faith. And there is a conscious assumption that I make is that God is listening in on the conversation. And in a sense, I'm talking about him with him being in earshot, if you follow my human analogy. But then there's times like I'll talk to my wife, well, I'm not sure what God is doing here, as if I can say that without God hearing,
mhm.
right? And so I'm kind of like I don't know what you're doing. But then there are times where I just make it really direct and clear. God,
Mhm. What are you
it-
doing?
what are you doing? It's funny that you asked that question because that thought came through it was almost like, there's comma, colon, semicolon, and then there's an exclamation mark. And when he addresses the Lord, of course, for forever in my life now, whenever I, read the phrase built the altar, I'll remember what you taught us, Gary, about, the uncut stones. That will stick with me forever. Man-made versus um, God-made, I guess. I don't know what the right term is. I also thought it was not really humorous anymore. I guess I would have saw it as humorous many years ago, but it's kind of sad. So, they've come back and they've got plenty. And as Matt said, if they can't get along with plenty, imagine. So it's crowded, but they got plenty. What's it like when we don't have plenty? And I mean, that's a test.
The Going to verse 8, one of the things that when you were reading it through the first time, Jim, is Abraham said a lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we're close relatives. You said, and I believe it, Abraham or Abram here is a great leader. And when we are leading, culture matters, and how we lead people matters. And I'm not one to, I will pull any leadership concept out of scripture. I will not ever force one into scripture though. But when you look at this, Abraham knew as a leader to fulfill what God was doing in him that he had to, because culture is about protecting, the space, if you would, and how we operate in this space. And he knew that if he allowed Lot and Lot's herdsmen to continue the quarreling and the bickering. Now, that doesn't mean Abraham's guys weren't doing it too. I mean, this isn't one sided. The scripture doesn't explain that. But Abraham was able to discern what it was and make a decision on it. And as a leader, that is a big part of it because we can get consumed with bigger is better. Because imagine together, man, they could accomplish a lot. They could make a lot of, I mean, they came back. It says when they, as you said, when they came back, they've become very wealthy in livestock and silver and gold. And there could be a sense of, maybe Lot was riding his coattails. Maybe Lot was a pretty sharp guy in some ways and brought some things to the table. But Abram knew that, hey, to go forward from here, this culture of what we've built is not going to work. And we're going to have to make some decisions that are difficult. Again, not trying to inject leadership principle into the scripture, but I think we can pull that one out and see it because he's not afraid to have the conversation
And
to
Matt,
say,
well,
but
it's really interesting when you mention that because look what he did next that reinforced his sincerity. He said, "Look,
yeah,
we don't want to be fighting."
yeah,
And then he didn't say, "Let me take the place on the left so we won't fight." He said, "You decide." And it reinforced that what he really meant it.
yeah,
My objective here is that we not fight. So you
yeah,
decide. That
yeah, you
you put
decide.
those two
Yeah,
together and they're just powerful leadership
yeah,
ideas.
yeah. I agree. I agree. And and I love that. If you keep going with that, he said, if you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. And a leader sees what can be, regardless of what's in front of them. But man, a godly leader sees that opportunity and knows that they're going to be trusting God either way. So if you decide to go one way, then I'm going to go the other way because I'm trusting God to take care of me. It doesn't matter if I go left or right. God, God's got my back on this, and man, that talk about Abram taking leadership to another level. That's godly leadership right there, and that's godly faith as a leader to say, "Hey, here's the opportunity. God's got me." You know, you go the well-watered way. You go with what you can see. An opportunist is always going to go with what looks best in the moment, and a godly leader says, "Hey, I'm going to go where I know God's got my back."
Yeah, I also think it's interesting that verse 7 says, "At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land." So this wasn't a spatial thing. Like this literally wasn't like a regional. There's literally not enough land because there's a lot of people in this mix. This was specifically about the different types of leadership, the different types of ways that they were going about managing their resources. So yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah, yeah, I'm repeating myself to some degree, but last time we were together, I talked about something that happened to me, where I heard three things, had three thoughts. I'm thinking small, and so therefore I'm praying small, and I'm doing too much, and it took me about 24 to 48 hours to try to put all those things together. And ever since then, a couple weeks ago, I've been working to unpack that, and I'm still doing that. And even today, I've been so much more calm, not trying to I'm such a type A driven person. I got to make sure that I get as much possible done today as I can, which seems to fit with today counts and lead today. But it doesn't really, because it's really about what's the most important thing that I could be doing today, not just all the activity. And so again, where I think I see Abraham growing, and that's why I like this story, is let's just say he had an Abraham thought, I better get my family out of here. And let's just say that that wasn't necessarily a evil thought, a bad thought, but it was an Abraham thought, which still means it could have fallen short of a God thought. And so now he's putting more confidence in himself. He's adding pressure on himself. He gets into Egypt, deals with probably just now realizing as he's journeying. I mean, I don't know if he's on a donkey, a camel, or walking, but he's got plenty of time to go, oh, dang, my wife is beautiful. We're about to enter enemy territory. I got to figure out. So now he's got to figure out something else. And now he's putting more confidence in his own craftiness. And then that gets him in trouble. And then he sees God's hand cover, he still gets a spanking, of course, and embarrassment, I'm sure. He gets disciplined, but he also gets rescued out of that. And so Matt was talking about, he didn't use the word, but this is what he was saying. Now he's standing, and that was good insight too, Winston. I didn't think about it. It might have had less to do with geography. Now he's standing there, whether he knew it consciously or not, he was able to look at the expanse and have the confidence that God was with him and didn't need to prove a point with Lot. Sometimes we can lower ourselves to conflict. Sometimes we need to rise to deal with conflict, but sometimes we need to not lower ourselves to conflict. And knowing the difference makes all the difference. Whether this,
Oh,
go ahead.
you read this as at least on the surface. This comes to your faith comment, Matt, about Abraham having faith. It looks like Lot took the better choice. Is that the way you read this passage?
Yes.
So he could see the richness where Abraham was given something that he couldn't see, which ties in earlier. He was told to go into a land he didn't know, but he's trusting God, and so it's just an interesting reaffirmation that he trusts God to give up the best part. He was the elder statesman here, right? Lot's his nephew. There was no yielding. Hey, Lot didn't say, "Well, no, you're the one here that was called by God, so you decide." Lot didn't say that. Lot said, "Oh, this looks better over here, so I'll take it."
Yeah, it's clear. It's clear, right? It's a cliche, but it's still true and clear. Lot is walking by sight. Abraham is walking by faith.
Hey everyone, we're going to take a brief break from the podcast to let you know our very own Jim Piper has released a brand new book called Story, The Art of Learning from Your Past. Everyone has a past, but not everyone learns from it. Jim unpacks lessons in this book that help leaders and learners understand the potential our past has to impact our present and our future. Be sure to grab your copy of Story where books are sold. All right, let's get back to the podcast.
Do we think that this conflict could have been avoided if Abram, took God at his word originally in chapter 12, verse 1, where he was supposed to leave his family like altogether?
Well, I read a commentary on that, and it said, yeah, part of this is it's the consequences of Lot not fully obeying God because he was supposed to have left. And some would say Lot was not supposed to even be there anyway. So
Yeah, today counts. The decisions I make today, they're going to come back tomorrow or a year from now, or
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
those consequences are still there.
If you're in that vein, I think, at a practical level, you could think about just how many relationships do we fight for that we don't need to be fighting for because of loyalty, or, we feel like we owe people, or just because they're our family. But it's like, I've heard it said, there are relationships for a reason, for a season, and for a lifetime. And so often, we don't have that discernment, and we think everybody goes with us, right? We think everybody is going to make the journey with us to wherever God is, taking us. And we have to constantly be assessing, who do I need to be intentional about? Who do I need to be um, investing in, or, giving, my time or attention. And sometimes we're in relationship with people that are not meant to go where God's taking us. And so I see this also, right? Like Lot potentially wasn't supposed to go where Abram was going, and now there is this obviously a brewing conflict that maybe could have been avoided altogether if Abram took God at his word.
I also see a theme of, God parenting us. I think sometimes God does step back and lets us navigate. And like I said earlier, I don't see great evil in Abraham's mistakes and Abram's mistakes. I see weakness. I don't necessarily see evil. And I think there's a difference. In this state of history, I think there's a difference between weakness and evil. Now, weakness can lead us to evil, and yet God's hand of protection was still on him. I'm not rushing to a conclusion here. That's why I kind of love this last part. He's already done this. You know, look as far as you can in every direction. And by the way, every direction is where Lot went.
Yeah.
It's all yours. Lot thinks and it's so typical of a younger leader. I probably did the same thing. I want this, I want that.
Well, and you think you want it now.
Yeah.
Abraham was willing to play, I would say, to the long game, but he was also looking through an eternal perspective because he had had an encounter with God that was so very real that it caused him to pack up and leave, which was, unheard of, if you would, in that setting. Families really were clans and tribes, and you just didn't go far. And so such a moment with God that he would pack it up and leave it. So he's playing with an eternal perspective, whereas Lot is, living in the temporal, the right now. I can, let's just bring it down to where we live. I can make the money faster because half the work is already done. It's well watered. It's ready to go. I can come in and harvest without having to sow. Man, every young leader's dream is that right now, and it has been. I say right now, but I mean it has been. But Abram was playing with a longer game in mind, and I would venture to say because of his encounter with God. He knew what God was capable of doing in his life. And man, would that story just continue to unfold of
Yeah.
trusting God. So
Well, and as we know, the next chapter, Abram's not done with Lot's problems, and
mm-mm.
Lot's issues.
Heck, the next 3 or 4 chapters,
Yeah.
they
So
just exasperate of
yeah,
my
before we spoil that, let me throw another question at you guys and see what you think, because there seems to be a model here of even though I'm lowering God to the size of a human, a mentor, if you will, and I don't mean to do that, but I'm looking at how apparently God dealt with Abraham through all of this, a leader who makes a mistake. Um, what principles do you see and how God dealt with Abram that we could perhaps practice when leaders that we mentor or even colleagues, trip and fall and make a mistake?
How do we handle those situations?
Yeah, or what can we learn from how God dealt with Abram that we can apply to our own leadership when it comes to, leading our teams, mentoring somebody, whatever we might have somebody we might have influence over.
Yeah, I think my initial thought, have an opportunity to play basketball at a fairly high level. Um, there's a delicate balance between coaching and coaching to build up a player, and taking out frustration and this level of shame or disappointment that would impact a player's confidence, if you will. So what I see here is God being able to course correct Abram in a way that he's still going to be able to move forward, because God is God, right? He could have easily just shut down this whole um, journey, if you will, based off of one mistake. But we see this theme throughout the scripture, right? That God continually uses those who are willing to be corrected, who are willing to take coaching, if you will. And so for us, mentoring, discipling others, making sure that the way that we're coaching them. There's a way that we're going about it that is building up and not disqualifying, not demeaning, right? It can be easy to be critical versus having a well-intentioned design to help somebody ultimately learn from their mistakes so that they can try again. And I think a great leader, great mentors are looking for those who they're developing to be able to try again. And we see Abram gets multiple opportunities in the midst of his decisions.
No, we don't have the benefit of knowing what Lot was like later in life that much, but to your point, Winston, it seems like when you treat somebody in a principled way like Lot did, even though Lot may not ready have processed it or received it with the insight it deserved, later on he may see it. In other words, as a leader, do what's right before the Lord, not do what will be appreciated by the person you're interacting with.
That's good, Gary.
Yeah,
That's good.
because it so often I want to react to the circumstances instead of being led by God. And I'm sure that later on, well, I'm not sure, but hopefully later on, Lot could see what Abram had done. Maybe I see in my life things, sacrifices my parents made that I didn't understand at all till 30 years later. I'll give you just a silly example. I went to Ohio State. We grew up on a farm, never really had much of anything. A depression parents and just barely got by. And Ohio State went to the Rose Bowl in 1970, got beat by not that I'm bitter or anything, but my parents sent me $1,000 because they wanted me to go on that trip. And I sit here and think when 1970, $1,000 was probably worth 5 or 6 or 7. But regardless, they didn't have it. They didn't have it. And I just didn't really ever think a thing about it until years and years and years later.
I think it's unusual for a young person to think about it because right when you said that, I'm thinking about the time I blew up the engine in my car because I wouldn't do what my dad said, check the oil, check the oil, check the oil.
Mm-hmm.
And then he paid to have he let it sit for 6 months, which was good lesson, because then you had to humble yourself as an upperclassman and take the bus, to school. And then he eventually paid to have the engine, rebuilt and gave me a loan for that. And then I ended up getting, married sometime later, still was kind of nickel and diming paying that note down. And, they forgave that, that note, not to mention all kinds of other things. Right. And I mean, at that time, I remember going, oh, phew, glad that's off my back. And not, that was kind of like my attitude. This is a little bit off topic, but we are talking about leadership. I also see Abram as an approachable leader. I'm thinking about the stories that we have yet to cover in his life, but I get this idea that he probably wasn't the most assertive, maybe, but he was living his faith out loud. I kind of can see him giving a constant commentary. I think like, they're racing back from Egypt and what is he saying to Sarah or Sarai? What is he saying to her? He says stuff before she went to the king's court.
She was still mad at him. It didn't matter what he was saying. She wasn't talking back. I'll tell you.
But
You just called me your sister. What is wrong with you?
What was he saying? I don't see Abram as somebody who I kind of see him. Well, I blew that one, guys. I literally can see him. I can see him doing that. I can see him doing what we've talked about, where he's talking to God in the, as if he's talking about God, but well, I think God wanted me to see this. I didn't see that. I did this. I kind of see him, that way, because when I see him and Isaac, going up the hill and Isaac's, he starts asking his dad questions, right? And his dad just calmly answers. So And then when you see the way he handled Lot in the text that we have today, he just seems to be an approachable leader, whether he's giving you good, solid advice or not. He just seemed to be an approachable person. That's another thing that I just kind of saw in this.
I mean, if you
Pulling
go
back,
back to the situation with his wife, I mean, he he would have had to be charismatic and persuasive enough to even have that interaction with the Pharaoh, right? Like, how did that conversation even come about? Like, it definitely wasn't transactional or awkward. He had
It
to
wouldn't
teach
have
him
worked in my house.
no, I I would have probably one of us would have been told to stay in Egypt. I don't know if she was staying or I was staying, but somebody was staying in Egypt.
Somebody's leaving.
So yeah, because somebody's going to go. I something that's comes to mind, Gary. You kind of said it, Jim. You said, what can we learn as mentoring leaders that are on our team? And Gary, the more you talk through even some of that idea, leading. First off, leading is hard. Anybody that says it not, they're not leading. They're just talking about it. But something happens in life, and I don't know that this can be a prescriptive measure what I'm about to say, but a lot just look at verse 10. I'm reading out of the NIV version. He looked around and he saw verse 10. He looked around and he saw what looked good and he chased it without spoiling the next 3 or 4 chapters, because the next one he just gets caught and captured. Abram, a lot going on there, but it never got better all the way to chapter 18, 19, where we'll get there. We never see Lot learning or going the right direction. And he had a moment there where he tried, but as we're leading our team, is there a point that we just look at them, and if we recognize maybe, and I don't know the word to put around this trait, all three of you men are much smarter than I am on this. So um, you know, if it's not tempered, it will run you off the rails. Like if you don't temper that wanting or that flash or that uh, success packaged in the wrong way, however you say that. And
lust.
I have some close friends that they were telling they were with their the tone of their voice, they were trying to tell me one thing, but their words were selling them out
Mm-hmm.
so fast.
Mm-hmm.
Like, man, this is where I feel like God's called me to go do it. And they would try to say it in a way that was convincing, but the words of what they were doing, I'm like, you need to think about that. No, 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 no. No, this is what their words were selling them out, that they were chasing what was easy, what was right in front of them, what was flashy, what was, let's just call it well watered. And I've seen church planners do this. I've seen business owners, just take that world. I've seen church planners leave a church and go 5 miles down the road, and man, I feel like God is no, it's well watered. Like, you've been building that with a senior leader somewhere for the last 5, 10, 12 years. Yeah, it feels like it's going to work. And I've seen a lot of them, their lives run off the rails. Like somebody in business, they have an idea, of a similar industry they've worked in. So they build their own little, book of clients. And they're like, oh, this is going to work. No, no, no. It's just well watered right now. And you didn't do anything for it, but you're going to go try to reap it. And so again, I'm not trying to be prescriptive with this, but as we see young leaders in this place, can we try to be a voice of reason? Because Abraham was just kind of like, hey, if you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go. Kind of do what you want with. I'm like Jim. He was just kind of talk. He was leading as he went, and he was leading as he was talking, or leading as he was responding, which makes him very approachable. But is there something here that we could pull out as leaders when we see a young leader, particularly, that wants to go chase something easy, well watered? Say, hold on, let's dig into motives. Let's dig into work ethic. Let's dig into, the list could go on.
I think my takeaway on this chapter is what would it look like if my relationships with others, we were talking on a more frequent basis about what we're learning and why we're making the decisions that we're making. Like, for example, what if I said, I just don't feel like getting any strong direction on this particular issue, and so I'm using all the faculties I know what to do. So by faith, I guess I'm gonna take this road, and we'll see what happens. Versus try to create a narrative like Matt was just talking about that tries to convince others.
Hmm.
What if we just said it the way it is?
Hmm.
I was telling a story today in my coaching appointment just before, maybe an hour before our podcast, our episode today. And I was telling a story about an enterprise that I had started. And it got to a place where I believed I need to take the next step, which was a really big step. And I was about to sit down at a conference table that was unrelated to that enterprise, but it was another organization I was part of. And as I was sitting down, I was in conversation with one of the participants, and I said to him, I said, I am more afraid of going to the next level than I was to start this enterprise in the first place. And it just kind of flowed out of me because I think I felt safe, with his name's Mike. And without even a hesitation, Mike says, well, that's because now you've got something to lose. It might be obvious to the rest of the world, but that wasn't obvious to me until that moment. And I thought, that's the beauty of having relationships where we can just talk openly. Or so what was I kind of saying? I think I'm doing the right thing, but I'm scared that I'm doing the wrong thing. And what if I screw it up and lose all of this, right? Um, and that's what I was saying. And somehow he heard it and was able to say it in a way where I went, wow, that I'm just wondering how that would change the dynamics of some of our relationships and our leadership structures if we didn't just talk about Abram, but we used Abram to say, if thousands and thousands and perhaps millions of people can read of the smart things he did and the dumb things he did, then why don't we get a little more open about the good, the good and bad, and we just all might do better? I know that sounds like a weird takeaway, but that's kind of the takeaway that I'm taking away. How about you guys? What are you taking away?
Well, your story brought to mind something. Maybe it's a little off, but you talked about this something to lose. This is supposedly a true story. It was years and years old, but some man who bootstrapped his business from nothing, like apparently you were talking about yourself, and he got it to working, and then I don't know, he sold it and was wealthy, and then going around and telling people his faith journey and how God had blessed him and all of that, and was had great success. And at the end of his talk, some little old lady got up and says, "Well, why don't you go do it again?" And
Yeah.
that thought never left me. I just thought,
Mm,
yeah, now he had $1 million to lose. When he started the first time, he had $10 to lose.
yeah.
And boy, you're bringing up, Jim, what he got to lose. That is such a big. That really tests your faith. It
It
really.
does.
But to that, Gary, I mean, again, I'll read between the lines here a little bit, but what if Abram, let's just think of that. He built an altar. Let's go back to verse 4. He'd already been here. He built an altar first and called on the name of the Lord. Because it said he went where he had been earlier. Okay, well now he's got a whole lot more, and so he's sitting here, and he may be thinking that idea, and I think it's interesting that God gets him on verse 14 and says, "Okay, Lot's gone. Now come over here." And you've got a lot more to lose this time, but I want you to look around from where you are. And it's to the north and the south and the east and the west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I'll make your offspring like the dust of the earth. Anybody count the dust? They be counted. And then it's verse 17. I don't know what I would do with this statement. Go walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I'm giving it to you. I think that's a long ways. I'm not real sure. As far as I can see, I don't know what, depending on the terrain, I can see as far as 25, 30 miles sometimes 40 miles. If I get on a little bit of a hill, I can see, 70 miles. So depending on where he's at, terrain, geography, but this is God's way of reminding him, Abram, you may have more and you may feel like you have more to lose, but I've got more to give you.
Amen.
And I'm just preaching to myself right now because of our current situation of where we're living in right now as a church. But you just ministered to me, Gary. So I'm gonna preach to all of us on my little soapbox now. Um, but if I could trust God with a little bit, I think I've helped the church gain, if you would, the enterprise gain over the last 15 years.
Uh,
And God's saying, well, that's cute. I mean, yeah, I'm the reason for it all anyway. But hey, why don't you go walk the length and the breadth of this? Because I'm just going to show you that as far as you keep walking, I still own it and it's still mine. And if I gave you what I even consider that you consider a lot, but God considers a little bit, if I gave you all of that, I've got more. I've got more than I can give you. And again, it goes back to the same word we used early on, and that's trust. Either we trust God with it or we don't. Either we trust God blessed us from the nothing to the little, and then we all have our own definition of a little to a lot. Um, then we should trust God from a lot to what God has next for more. Thank you for that. You ministered to me today. This wasn't for anybody else today. It was for me and Gary.
Winston?
Sidebar, Jim. That's the way these things have turned into something that feed me. These coffees, they do. They really do. I need it.
Metaphorical coffees that don't
Yeah.
exist here.
Yeah, I don't drink coffee, but tea. I'll drink tea.
Our coffee time that he does not drink coffee at.
Yeah, I mean, I just have kind of a simple thought observation. We've kind of probably even said it or touched on it, but in verse 8, just the phrase, then Abraham said to Lot. And I just think about that idea that Abraham as a leader had to confront Lot. And there's this theme even throughout chapter 12 and 13 that Lot was always following Abraham's lead. It literally says, and Lot went with him, and Lot went with him. And so Abraham was always the catalyst. He was always the one that was confronting, and he had to specifically confront Lot about this thing so that God could get him alone and keep him moving forward. And so I just love that idea that as leaders, we have to be willing to confront, the elephant in the room, have the conversation, make the hard decision. It was the confrontation that was the catalyst to, the calling, if you will.
Yeah, I appreciate all three of you guys. I always do. And this Genesis 13 is really a diving board into some really exciting. It could easily turn into a movie series. What we're about to get into. So, I'm thinking, how about we close with this? Verse 12 says, "So Abram settled in the land of Canaan, and Lot moved his tents to a place near Sodom, and settled among the cities of the plain." Sodom was a dangerous place to be associated with, so we'll see that in the next chapter. And then we have this little obscure verse in verse 18, and I'm going by memory here, so hopefully I'm not too far off. It says, "So Abram moved his camp to Hebron." He moved his camp to Hebron and settled. Well, he moved his camp to Hebron. If I remember right, Hebron means a place of vision, and settled near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. And if I recall correctly, Mamre means the place of communion. I know that when good vision has come out of my life, it has been because I've sat in communion and I've thought about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and let it settle. And the fumes of that, or the aroma of that, would bring about a new vision and a new day. And then he ends it by saying, there he built another altar to the Lord. Pretty cool statement. Care about you guys, and I can't wait to dive into the next chapter. I hope you have a great day. Thanks for spending figurative coffee with me.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us here at the Today Count Show. Be sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform you listen or watch so you don't miss any content. And stay tuned for more coming soon.